Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. Today is a big stream, which honestly, I kind of didn't think I would be streaming at all today. It's a really long work day, but still kind of got off a little bit earlier than expected. So I thought, oh man, a little bit time after all. And then I thought, well, iOS 26 Beta 2 is probably coming out today, if not tomorrow. So I definitely want to stream once I have some first-hand impressions on that, right? So maybe I should move it. But after just like talking to you guys on Discord and checking the news in general, like I was flabbergasted how much chip related rumors have been accumulating, whether it's for the iPhone 17, the iPhone 18, the Galaxy Z Flip 7, all devices featuring the Snapdragon 8 Elite 2, devices featuring the Dimensity 9500. Just in general Samsung related stuff. Like once I put that all together, and you can see that in what's probably the longest tab bar we've ever had. I mean, you can kind of ignore three of them where I just have like basically reference data from Geekbench, because we are going to be using a lot of like performance comparisons, performance estimates today. Yeah, but once I realized how much there is, I honestly thought even if iOS 26 is coming out today, which it very well might right during the stream, it just makes a lot of sense for me to talk about all of this, to just have it not in writing, but basically in memoriam, because I want this to have as like a reference point for future videos. And while I could kind of memorize all those rumors by myself, well, that is kind of pointless if I have a live stream channel and I don't use that for me. We have Raisa in the chat sending some fun stickers. We have Angelica saying she's looking forward to an interesting new topic. Well, the topic isn't quite new as much as it is being becoming more and more nuanced, more and more detailed. I apologize if I'm sweating today. It's not even from the heat. We actually have a giant thunderstorm brewing up here in Berlin. Like the wind is crazy, like 60 kilometers per hour or more. And it's extremely humid. So that's why I'm sweating. That's why I have my cooling system in front of me. So please apologize for that. We have Rosa joining the chat saying hi, learning how to spell my name correctly. That's very, very much appreciated. You guys see, but before we get fully into all of that, no drama today, at least unless like Linus posts a video right during the stream that I need to analyze. Our last few videos have performed pretty well. The subscriber count is doing well. We have people talking a lot more on Discord. So just to annoy you a tiny bit more, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. Like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it. And of course, please comment. You guys know I love interacting with a lively comment section, getting your opinions, your agreements, your disagreements. I know my streaming schedule wasn't quite as full as I had promised because some work and family stuff had come out late last week. Should be a little bit more regular this week from anything that I can gather. Yeah, and beyond all that, if you catch me live and if you're enjoying what you're seeing, you can support this channel directly via Super Chat or Super Sticker. You can become a supporter over on Patreon, or you can become a member right here on YouTube. Shout out to our MarkTech Pro Max channel members, Angelica, Steve, Max Maximus, and Jonathan. So thank you to anyone who just watches the video, who likes them, and of course to anybody who supports this channel directly. Let's get into this. Now, this is a small one, but it is coming from a leaker that we do cover from time to time, which is Fixed Focus Digital. So from the main Weibo Apple leakers, and they're not only Apple leakers, but it's like Fixed Focus Digital, Digital Chat Station, right? Those are names we usually are like quite familiar with at this point, especially like over the last half year. I think also a lot of these websites have gotten a lot better at mentioning who is posting on Weibo. I don't know if maybe they tried to do some stolen valor in the past, and this is not a specific accusation against anyone, but like I don't remember people mentioning the specific names of the leakers in the past as much as they're doing now, probably because they now have a little bit of an actual track record, and it is actually journalistically more advantageous to quote them more directly with their name and everything and say, oh, and they also have this track record, rather than just saying, oh, it's shit coming from Weibo. But what exactly is coming from Weibo here and from Fixed Focus Digital, to be more precise? Well, according to Fixed Focus Digital, the next iPhone chip, the A19, of course, we are likely getting the A19 in the iPhone 17 Air, maybe in the base 17 model, though that is rumored to maybe still stick with the A18. And then, of course, we're getting the A19 Pro variant for the iPhone 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max. So how those exactly differ, maybe like GPU count, maybe CPU count, memory bandwidth, exact amount of memory. So we'll see that obviously once those iPhones come out. Well, the iPhone's A19 chip later this year could be as fast as Qualcomm's upcoming Snapdragon 8 Elite 2 processor, which obviously is the successor to the Snapdragon 8 Elite. But Apple isn't pursuing that in favor of preserving battery life. So it is believed that Apple's A19 could be as fast, but Apple would basically, my assumption is that the main way that they would like tune it for efficiency is similar to what is already happening, to be quite honest, on the A18 versus the Snapdragon 8 Elite, which is, I'm not sure if Apple is adding extra cores, because quite honestly, given the power consumption that you get, even with 6 cores consisting out of 2 performance and 4 efficiency cores, in terms of sustained power draw, it's already too much, even for a vapor chamber system, right? If we're at least looking at maximum, right? And then when we are looking at the 8 Elite maximum, which is consisted out of 2 performance and 6 efficiency cores, then basically the only smartphone that even realistically gives you that peak multi-core performance is like an actively cooled gaming phone. And there's like the special Samsung version, but that is not good at actually sustaining its multi-core performance, even close in that regard. In fact, there are devices that technically feature a slower 8 Elite chip, right? So a lower clocked one, assumingly just one that isn't as premium. From what I understand, Samsung just gets like high picking from the 8 Elites that are being produced. But actually, we have devices like the OnePlus flagships that outperform Samsung despite technically having a slower 8 Elite. So supposedly the A19 will have more instructions per clock and overall better efficiency. Now, once again, we do not yet quite see if there is a node difference coming this year. For the first time in a while, the A18 chips and the Snapdragon 8 Elite lined up with the node they were using. They were using the N3E node, or second generation 3 nanometer node from TSMC. From everything we kind of understand about the A19, it's going to be moving to the N3P node, or the third generation of 3 nanometer, basically a more performance oriented variant of 3 nanometer. The 8 Elite 2, we don't yet quite know if it's going to be also an N3P or if it might stay on N3 for cost and logistical reasons. So again, there have been some crazy predictions, and we'll get to some of them in its overall performance. But yeah, Apple is focusing here on power, performance, and area, which includes power per area and, of course, and performance per area. We have Diablo asking, oh, Diablo, I think you've been on the channel for a while. but like not really like chatting. How Exynos 2500 compares to A19? Well, we'll get to the Exynos 2500. To be quite honest, out of all the major 3 chips we're talking about today, and we are talking still about Apple's chips too, but of course the A19 and later the A20, but out of the Android chips, which are in my thumbnail, of course, we will be talking about the Exynos 2500, but it's not a flagship chip, right? So it's the chip I am least interested in when it comes to like, oh, what its raw performance, right? How can it defeat the A19? Is it finally good enough for Samsung to move back from Qualcomm to their own in-house designs? No, the Exynos 2500 was actually designed for the Galaxy S25, which you can guess that from the name, right? Exynos 2500 is the chip for 2025. Exynos 2400 was the chip for 2024. And it's basically been delayed because Samsung yields on 3 nanometer have been so garbage. We have Riley joining the chat saying hi, a lot of familiar faces, really glad to see you. Again, I know YouTube is punishing me for my irregular streaming schedule, so I'm really, really grateful to anyone who finds these streams, who joins live, who checks out the video afterwards, who comments, of course. So thank you guys very, very much. Yeah, of course, this article thankfully also points out that faster does not equal better. We have seen, for example, on the 8 Elite devices, even the ones that have a nice vapor chamber cooling system, they're actually pretty bad at sustaining the full performance. In fact, it's actually architectural improvements and efficiency gains that even help it get as far as it did. So it's not a bad chip by any means. The N3 node helps. The architecture is good. The GPU architecture, I would argue, is way better than it was before, especially for efficiency. But when it comes to sustained peak performance, like, unless it's an actively cooled gaming phone, we are so far away from that dream. But speaking of vapor chambers, and this is coming from Majin Buu, who, similar to Fixed Focus Digital, also has a little bit of a mixed track record, but has gotten things right in the past, especially things regarding the supply chain. So he is not the greatest software leaker. Like just recently, for example, he leaked that Stage Manager would be coming to all USB-C iPhones. Obviously, that didn't happen. But granted, Stage Manager did come to a lot of older iPads, even down to the 8th generation basic iPad and down to the 5th generation iPad mini. So maybe that's what he got wrong. Maybe Apple was working on an even lighter version of Stage Manager for iPhones and ultimately canceled it or delayed it. But yeah, so take everything I'm covering from every source with a grain of salt. Riley saying he's hyped because the title is all chip news. Yes, it's all chips and some stuff like a little bit around it, like for example, like how the chip is gonna be cooled, for example. So speaking of that cooling system, and mentioning that Android devices have been adopting premium vapor chamber solutions for a while. Well, according to Majin Buu, Apple is moving to that on the iPhone 17 Pro and 17 Pro Max. So this is probably the most definitive statement in that regard, because the initial rumors of vapor chambers actually were saying it's for only the Pro Max model. Then it was for all the Pro models, and then it actually was for all the iPhone 17 models. Maybe not the base model, but probably the Air. And now it seems like it's for the 17 Pro, so Pro and Pro Max. Now, again, that could also still be wrong, but that's kind of the latest stage we're at when it comes to this rumor. So Majin Buu, of course, provides this image here, which is basically on the assembly line how the vapor chamber looks before it's been assembled. It's a pre-assembled image of the thermal plate. It shows a highly structured copper surface, likely serving as the base of a vapor chamber. The intricate microchannel patterns and extended coverage suggest it's engineered for wide area heat distribution. So that's very important. A big thing when it comes to cooling is not just how much thermal mass you have, but also how is your heat actually being distributed. Now, if you're in a PC, you probably don't need a super large surface area, at least relative to the relatively large chip you're using. For that, you actually have active cooling to help along, right? Well, for a 600 watt GPU, you probably need both, but that's a slightly different discussion. On smartphones, you definitely need thermal mass, but also because they're passively cooled, so they're only relying on like the air that's circulating around you. You're not constantly blowing on it. You're not connecting a fan to it, right? So, and of course, the larger their area, the more air can travel on top of that, and that helps. So Apple has been stingy with thermal materials. Yes, I'm not going to deny that. But a part of the discussion is also that Apple has not implemented a thermal solution, especially on glass iPhones, that allows the heat to cover a larger area, right? On iPads, it's actually a little bit easier because iPads have like a unibody aluminum surface. The chip is exactly in the middle. On the Pro models, there's even a copper Apple logo on top of that. And if you know anything about heat distribution systems, copper is one of the best materials for that. But then aluminum is actually a great material still for that. So the rest of the iPad's body is still doing its part. On the iPhone with a glass back, that's not as much of a case. And titanium is also not great for heat distribution. And stainless steel is actually completely terrible, even worse than titanium. So that's why partially there's also a rumor that Apple might be returning to an aluminum iPhone body this year. However, that has not been confirmed. Majin Buu goes on to compare this to conventional graphite pads, right? They use a phase change mechanism. So to anybody who doesn't know, inside the vapor chamber, giving it the name vapor and chamber, is a liquid that evaporates, creating a vapor. Of course, that evaporation happens because of the heat that is generated by the processor. Then it moves across the surface that we see here, then condenses back into the liquid, basically falling back to where it came from until it's ready to become a vapor again, right? Now, this system is a lot better if you just use this amount of copper without this internal cooling material. But it's very much dependent on still how much copper and aluminum you can get into this. Because if you don't have the actual thermal surface along which lines that liquid can actually, or at that point the vapor can then cool back down before it falls back as a liquid, yeah, then you're kind of fucked. We have M1 Max joining. Do you think the A19 Pro will be on par with the base M1 chip? Yes, absolutely. GPU is always a bit questionable when we are talking sustained performance versus raw output, but then the architectural gains will be quite significant. Plus, the base M1 actually used 4200 megatransfers memory. So even at 7500 on half the bus width, the iPhone gives you about the same memory bandwidth. If the iPhone actually moves beyond that to 8533, it would finally match the bandwidth of the M1. But then, yeah, when it comes to ray tracing, hardware accelerated mesh shading, plus all the AI capabilities that go into something like metal effects upscaling, denoising, and even frame interpolation at this point. All of that is far beyond than the capabilities of the M1. Solomon joining. Hey, Mark, hope you're doing okay. Saying he tuned in. Well, I'm doing good. I was a little bit tired, but my energy is picking back up a little bit. So thank you guys for joining. Thank you for chatting, letting me know what you want to know about. So, of course, vapor chambers is a better cooling solution than graphite pads. Should be noted, graphite is actually a great material for thermal distribution, but I'm not sure if they're graphite pad-based vapor chambers. So, on that way, I'm definitely not an expert. Obviously, high-performance tasks like gaming, on the iPhone's case, probably not as much video rendering, but when you think, for example, about a camera cooling, right? That's also an important workflow. Especially if you're recording 4K 120 frames per second video, and of course AI tasks. It's said that Apple is working on a lot of technologies, including big memory breakthroughs, to actually enable very high performant AI workflows on smartphones. Should be noted, of course, the vapor chamber inside the iPhone will still be a passively cooled system, so there's no rumor about the iPhone getting like a gaming phone like fan inside it, but it will still result in thermal throttling overall, especially in a hot environment. Maybe not if it's like minus 10 degrees outside, right? But in regular room temperature, and especially in like hot summer like right now, even a vapor chamber, because it's still passively cooled, is just not going to solve all your issues, right? He also brings up some interesting details here, so you can go read the entire article for yourself if you're really interested in, for example, how the technology actually works. But one thing that stands out is the vapor chamber's design is the extra segment extending toward the camera module, a zone traditionally not associated with high thermal output. This could imply a secondary function using the camera zone and metallic frame as passive heat dissipators. Now, I would actually be incredibly surprised if the metallic frame is not part of the overall heat dissipation system, especially if some of the wackier rumors about aluminum iPhone bodies being true. Now, with the camera zone being covered, if you actually know where heat gets generated on your iPhone, it's actually like right on the opposite side of the camera, right? So Apple would basically be spreading out that heat, not just top to bottom, but also left and right. We've seen a lot of Android phones doing basically like full width vapor chambers, and it's kind of needed given the power consumption of the 8 Elite, for example. But yeah, Apple is kind of playing catch up here, but also still doing some interesting things to make it work, of course. The iPhone's body is pretty packed. A lot of people, I think, don't quite realize that. Apple, for one, now Apple has a lot more buttons than most Android manufacturers, right? A lot of Android manufacturers have volume up and down, and sometimes it's even like a combined mechanism, and the power button. The iPhone, in addition to that, has the action button and camera control, so that's space taken up on both sides of the chassis. The iPhone also has very premium speakers. Pretty much only the Galaxy S Ultra devices compete in that regard. The iPhone also has premium haptics. No device has haptics that are as premium across the entire surface of the phone. Apple even builds in more microphones, like there are 4 microphones in the iPhone 16 Pro versus the 3 microphones in like the Galaxy S26 Ultra. So again, plus Apple also has to work with the fact that Apple does not like huge lawsuits, so they cannot really afford, similar to what Samsung thankfully stopped doing, is like build the battery right to the upper edge of the external glass. They leave a little bit, some room for the battery to swell up and then swell down. They don't want to repeat the Galaxy Note 7 situation, right? But yeah, the exact comparisons will of course be left up to outlets like GeekerVan, but in general we should be awaiting better sustained performance. Also, just from the fact that we are also moving to an N3P node and some architectural improvements, a lower chance of thermal throttling, hopefully, especially in like demanding workflows, like where you combine high screen brightness, 5G usage, and the chip, right? Especially in those scenarios, the iPhone tends to like dim down the display, throttle down the chip, right? Or just get very uncomfortably hot. That should help with that. Cooler device surfaces. Now, that should also be taken with a little bit of grain of salt, because while yes, the overall surface will be cooler than the hottest point is getting right now, it's actually likely that if you know how to like pull your fingers away from the hot spot right now, which is very concentrated on one side of the device, this heat will now extend over the entire area, but it's gonna be less heat. So cooler device surfaces, yes, overall, but yeah, it's a little bit more nuanced, which he does bring up also in the article. And improved energy efficiency under loads. Again, that is a little bit depending, because if you push heat away from the chip, that actually means it works under less resistance for the transistors, and that helps. That being said, usually Apple's chips are not so highly clocked that the resistance there doesn't get too outrageous. Yeah, but obviously we've talked now about the iPhone 17. Let's talk about next year's iPhone 18. So that one is going to be based on a 2nm A20 processor from TSMC. We don't fully know which generation of 2nm. Judging from some of the rumors that I'm seeing for like Zen 6 and Intel Nova Lake, I'm starting to think there's potential that maybe they're skipping right away to N2P, but I cannot guarantee that. There's also a question who else is utilizing that node. Again, if you look at, for example, the YouTube leaker Moore's Law is Dead, he talks about how AMD and Intel actually also have like very early bidding for the 2nm nodes, especially like N2P and N2X. Whether Qualcomm actually uses 2nm as early as Apple, the way that, for example, the N3E node of the 8 Elite and the A18 chips lined up. Again, we unfortunately don't know that. And I would kiss the feet of any leaker who would actually tell us that. But if you are excited about technology in general, and you're willing to hold up another year for your updates, you're not just getting a new node. That's, of course, to the multitude of other improvements coming to the iPhone 18 models, but you're also switching from an info packaging technology, which is integrated fan out, to a WMCM packaging technology, which is referring to wafer level multi-chip module packaging. Info allows integration of components, including memory, within the package, but focuses more on single die packaging where memory is typically attached to the main SoC, such as DRAM placed on top or near the CPU and GPU cores. That's pretty much what you see right now with Apple Silicon. It's optimized for reducing size and improving the performance of individual chips. Of course, that lines with everything up that we have seen from Apple, but WMCM excels at integrating multiple chiplets within the same package, which is why it's called multi-chip module. This method allows more complex systems such as CPUs, GPUs, DRAM, and other custom accelerators to be tightly integrated in one package. Now, this is something that I have actually been pretty confused about when I've always seen references to Apple going kind of chiplet, and people talk about the base, the A series chips and even the base M chips, which are relatively small. Like A series chips are like 120 square millimeter. Then the base M series chips are to like basically roughly double that, anywhere from 200 to 250, right? There is no reason to divide those up between CPUs, GPUs. However, and that is pretty interesting, I had not considered that DRAM could be basically seen as a chiplet in that regard, and that it could be basically fully integrated into the SoC. And of course, other accelerators, for example, with all the importance that is being put on AI, there is a legitimate question to be asked if Apple might not benefit more from having an AI accelerator that's separate from the main die, but still technically integrated into it. And if it can be done without like the latency penalties, for examples, or the performance scaling penalties that we have seen from the M Ultra processors, right? Why not do that? Especially if it would also allow you potentially to put that accelerator on a cheaper node, right? And of course, there's also the question, DRAM, of course, does bandwidth. What is the other thing that does bandwidth? That's, of course, cache, right? Now, technically, you can already stack cache, additional cache, onto an system, an SoC, or just a CPU. We see that from AMD all the time in their X3D processors. But imagine if Apple could do that with RAM, with cache, but actually have like basically no overhead, right? No latency penalty, no power consumption penalty, no heat dissipation penalty. All of that is a little bit utopian. There still will be some downsides to this kind of packaging technology, but it is definitely more future forward. And then, of course, when you look into big Apple silicon chips, Pro, Max, and then, of course, the Ultra variants, now it makes actually a lot of sense to separate the CPU, the GPU, and other components if you can actually integrate them back without a lot of penalties. Because we are hitting the reticle limit of the new dense and small nodes like 3 nanometer, like 2 nanometer. We probably cannot have like 500-600 square millimeters on 2 nanometer. By the time we get to like 14A, it's going to be questionable if we can even have 400 to 500 square millimeters. So that will be very challenging for chips of that size, like Apple's Max chips. So this technology, honestly, while it is exciting to hear about it for Apple's iPhone 18s and the Apple A20 processors, I am even more excited about this technology and its future in like bigger Apple silicon processors. So 2 nanometer starts production still this year, late 2025. Apple is expected to be the first to get access to it. Still some chance that they might not be first then for N2P and then 2X, but then again, some of the rumors by Moore's Law is that are usually a little bit iffy. So just bringing that up because I also posted that on Discord and I saw some of you guys being confused by it. Yeah, that's just the state of the discussion right now. Now, whether it means we get all A20 or only the A20 Pro chips on that is also a little bit questionable. We've also, of course, had rumors that the entire iPhone 18 lineup will be 12 gigabytes of RAM, potentially more, who knows? But yeah, this year it's basically iPhone 17 Pro and Pro Max, and maybe the Air, and also maybe the base 17, but probably not the base 17 at least. And then next year, everything is 12 gigabytes at least. So for AI tasks and just for general future proofing, for more demanding games, and just a more cohesive user experience, that is going to be great. Of course, 2 nanometer also helps with efficiency and overall performance. However, it's also going to be very important what kind of architectural gains Apple achieves, or to be quite honest, or not. So I always refer back to the M3 processor, which honestly, well, it's by no means a bad chip because neither the M2 nor the M1 were anything like bad, right? But it wasn't as big of a leap as one expected from 4 nanometer, especially from like second generation 5 nanometer to 3 nanometer, as much as we had hoped. But then N3E came out, and we all thought that N3E would be like a 5% improvement, maybe a 10% improvement over N3B. But instead, we got like the massive leap that we ended up seeing from like roughly 3,100 points in Geekbench 6 for the M3 to almost 4,000. So quite a lot of leaps to be taken here. Riley setting, if it's not a mature 2 nanometer A20, I am rioting. Yeah, it depends. There is seemingly no discussion that A20 by itself is well, A20 is the chip, but it's also 20 angstrom. But like, there is no discussion that first generation 2 nanometer is facing any of the issues that 3 nanometer did. Basically, 3 nanometer suffered initially from being very, very ambitious for a FinFET node, right? Which after that, we're moving to GAAFET. And basically, TSMC's 3 nanometer is about as dense as you can make FinFET. And that's why N3B was actually overbuilt. It had a ton of EUV layers and stuff like that, making it actually really expensive too. But somehow they overdid it and actually ended up making it worse in that way. That's why N3E is actually less dense than N3B, but it's actually more energy efficient, which is quite a crazy combination, because usually the denser a new node, the better it is at efficiency. Speaking of groundbreaking things that Apple is targeting over the next few years, this is something that we have brought up in the on the channel a few times in the past, but reading on how DRAM could now be integrated onto the chip made me think back to that rumor. And I mean, that rumor is just a month old. Well, supposedly Apple is using groundbreaking mobile HBM and TSV technology for the 2027 iPhone, basically allowing for much, much more memory bandwidth. HBM literally stands for high bandwidth memory, and it's currently used for server class applications. It basically takes regular memory and stacks it, to put it in the simplest way, though of course the actual memory modules you have to take have to be optimized for that workflow. And it brings the memory much closer to the processor. So while on iPhones the memory is already very close, and it seemingly is only getting closer, but for example, when you compare HBM versus GDDR, which is graphics memory, that's a lot lower latency and therefore a lot lower power consumption, because there's just less energy being wasted on the data being sent from the chip to the actual memory. Yeah, so we've heard rumors that Apple would basically move from a 4-channel memory to 6-channel memory. Obviously, by that time, we should also be getting probably like 10,700 mega transfers, like per module. So if you think about potentially 50% more channels, that could actually be like Apple doubling the bandwidth of the current iPhones and more, actually. But yeah, the exact details, of course, will remain to be seen once we actually have the device and once we actually have some concrete benchmarks to see how it all performs. That being said, we do have even more about the iPhone 18 before we move to all the other chip-related stuff, which is that, of course, the iPhone 18 Pro is actually supposed to be a pretty big update in many ways. One of them is the chip. The other is that it's going to be the first Pro iPhone to utilize an Apple in-house designed 5G modem. So while we have like the C1 designed for the iPhone 16e and the iPhone 17 Air, the iPhone 17 Pro is still gonna rely on the Qualcomm modem, right? But by the iPhone 18 Pro, Apple supposedly will have enough trust in their own modems to move on to that. So that's already 2 major changes. The other rumor that has been kind of on and off for a while, because it was kind of rumored actually initially for this year, is a smaller notch. So from Mark Gurman, we heard that the 20th anniversary iPhone, which is coming in 2027, would be getting a full screen design. Basically, potentially no cutouts, no notches, no dynamic islands, nothing of that sort. But Ross Young, who has done similar predictions in the past, but he's always updating, of course, the timeline, is now casting doubt on some of that. So he's saying that Apple will next year slim down the dynamic island, or notch if you want to call it that, but it would take like 2028 or even 2030 for Apple to go even beyond that. So if you actually look at his post on Twitter, he says in 2026, that's of course when we're getting the iPhone 18 series, we're getting a smaller notch because some under panel Face ID elements remain. So they will not be fully transparent under the panel. They will still have to be covered up by a cutout. And then in 2028, not 2027, as was rumored by Mark Gurman, all under panel Face ID elements except the selfie camera are hidden under the panel, now without a notch. The selfie camera itself remains separate, and supposedly it's migrating to the left side of the screen. Now, how that will work with Apple's dynamic island aesthetic that they've been building up now for a few years, to be quite honest, I don't know. And then by 2030, supposedly we're getting the selfie camera also under the panel. So at that point, no punch hole, no notch. At that point, I assume if there's any dynamic island, it's going to be purely software based, or Apple is actually going to move beyond that and just going to say, oh, we have live activities up top, but it doesn't have to be integrated into a pill because, well, our screen is really full screen if you wanted that, like a scene like that. So now I've teased you a lot, of course, with the chip coverage that's coming today. I just want to shout out some smaller stories that you guys might want to check out because I don't want to turn this into a 3-hour stream. So there's been some confusion about OpenAI and Jony Ive supposedly breaking up, because all references to like the IO company or the project, I guess, that they were working on inside the company was like pulled from the website, and people assumed, oh my God, is Jony quitting on Sam Altman or something like that? Or did Sam Altman overthink the $6.5 billion pricing? No, apparently there's a trademark lawsuit against basically the IO branding that was used there, but the deal is still happening just with a bit less branding. So if you were worried about that, if you're actually an insane person looking forward to the AI slop garbage hardware that they're going to be putting out, don't be worried anymore. Just be worried about the actual quality of the product. 3-hour chip stream sounds good though. Well, yeah, but not without more super chats. Come on. No, it's my voice just ain't gonna get me through that because I've been working from like 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. And basically like last minute made it at home. Then more legal stuff. So mentioning the lawsuit against Jony Ive and Sam Altman. Supposedly, Apple is close to announcing changes to how the App Store and how site loading works in the EU. So you guys know the EU basically put on a 500 million euro fine on Apple, but it seems like they're kind of finding an amicable agreement, and it finally feels like the Digital Markets Act is actually kind of being figured out as we're speaking. So the law itself, the regulation, leaves some room for interpretation. Apple, of course, used that room to charge a 27% commission on purchases made through those external links and stuff like that. I never thought the European Union would be happy about it, but I guess it was worth a try, and I wouldn't be surprised if this goes either entirely away or gets markedly changed to something way lower, or something that maybe has an absolute like max ceiling of like a few €1,000 or something like that. Yeah. However, we should be seeing something soon. So the timeline for Apple to basically figure their shit out in regards to the DMA regulations is this Thursday, June 26th. But yeah, whether or not that means the 500 million euro fine gets entirely away, or there's just no further penalties, seems like it's no further penalties at the very least. I guess 500 million euros is not much for Apple, but honestly, and I've said that on this channel time and time again, I believe truth and fairness is for everyone. It's not just for the little guy. The big companies, while I do believe they deserve higher taxes, more regulatory oversight, and they need to pull their fucking noses out of politics more, I do think that overall, like, fair treatment under law should be for everyone. And I feel like the DMA was just vague enough for Apple to be like, we don't even know what we are really doing here. I also think that the thing that I actually disliked the most about the way Apple implemented it, which is a core technology fee, which is a 50-cent fee per install per year, which basically makes it impossible for small companies to run a third-party store, which is why we basically have like EGS, the Epic Game Store, and we have stores that are kind of affiliated with Epic, who is paying for those stores. So that's quite funny. I actually think that this is, if I were the European Union, this is the thing that I would be going hardest against, because I think this is the one thing that Apple does that goes completely against the spirit of the law and probably the letter of the law as well. Now, I did promise to cover iOS 26 features on this channel, of course. However, obviously, I cannot cover all features because I don't use everything that is inside iOS, iPadOS, macOS, and stuff like that. Plus, the general stability for certain stuff is currently a little bit too low. Like Spotlight Search on Mac, at least on mine, just isn't good. But if you were, for example, interested in how the new audio management tools for iPadOS 26 perform for stuff like podcasting, unfortunately, still probably not good enough for live streaming. But you can actually look at the 6 Colors report saying that while it requires a few workarounds, including what Apple does itself, seemingly the iPad now becomes a way better tool for audio and video capture. So that's very, very nice. While still multiple apps don't have access to the microphone at the same time, which is obviously what you would want as a podcaster, right? You would want one audio stream going to obviously the video call that you are hosting for the actual podcast, and then one is going out to be recorded. For that actual recording, though, the iPad has system level audio recording now, right? So while you cannot like let a separate app record your audio while you have your Skype or Zoom call or Riverside or something like that, now the iPad itself at least can record what's happening while you're still fine having your podcast call. So while it's not ideal, it's definitely a lot better. And my assumption is that Apple is now a lot more interested in giving the iPad more pro functionality, given that they gave it like that window view, right? Very macOS-like. So Apple definitely is giving in at least a little to the demands of pro iPad users. But I've teased you now enough, especially you, Riley. Let's move to the chips that are mentioned in the thumbnail. And let's start with probably what is the least exciting of all of them. It's the Exynos 2500. This is Samsung's actual official explainer about it. So technically, obviously, it should have been out for quite a while. given that the 2400 launched early in 2024 and the 2300 launched in early 23. But this was delayed because it's built on Samsung's 3 nanometer node. That one is having, or at least was having, issues. And now Samsung is promising to bring greater excitement to your life, providing safe on-device access to users anywhere at any time. The Exynos 2500 ushers in a new, unprecedented AI experience. You guys see how CPU and GPU are not even the priority in the marketing statement. Built with the cutting-edge 3 nanometer process, it combines powerful CPU, NPU, and GPU into one chip, representing the pinnacle of contemporary mobile technology. We'll get later to actual benchmarks that definitely put some question marks on that promise, but we'll get to that. So Samsung does start with a promise of 59 TOPS, which is trillion operations per second in terms of the NPU AI workloads. That's supposedly 39% faster than its predecessor. It's also a lot faster than what Apple advertises for their chip. Let me actually look. Is it 39 on Apple's? It's 35. It's 35. Now, it should be noted that the way all those companies calculate them, that is somewhat different. But hey, maybe this chip is actually a lot faster. Again, I always have to mention that because I know this is like an Apple focus channel, but I have no skin in the game here, right? If Samsung makes a chip that's better at AI, that's just better for me because down the road, Apple has to do more to catch up on that. Now, I will put some question marks about the value of focusing as much on AI in a chip that's clearly not actually high-end anymore. But hey, Samsung needed to focus on something, right? So this will allow for more on-device AI capabilities, more efficient AI capabilities, right? Stuff like that. Yeah, and then they basically just like, you can have now cameras with it. They're 320 megapixels because AI-based image processing. Okay. Like, again, the actual final outcome, of course, greatly depends on the algorithm that's being used. So you don't get overprocessing, you don't get artificial colors. But hey, at least the performance is there. Cutting edge to cut power draw. Increase your productivity while using less power. This is the thing I'm most interested about with the Exynos 2500, especially since it's rumored that all Galaxy Z Flip 7 devices will be powered by it. So it brings you enhanced power efficiency enabled by improvements in the power reduction architecture across various blocks, as well as the latest manufacturing processes and packaging tech. Built with the cutting-edge 3 nanometer gate-all-around process technology. So one of the first smartphone chips to be built on GAA rather than FinFET. So that's exciting. Hopefully their note is actually good. The Exynos 2500 provides better power efficiency and enhanced heat dissipation. Should be noted, heat dissipation has nothing to do with the Note. It actually gets worse with denser transistors. So I assume they just mean that their devices will be featured, right? I mean, they do say it has reduced chip thickness because they use fan-out wafer level packaging. So fan-out's actually what we just mentioned is what is currently being utilized by a lot of companies. But it's FOWLP. Again, no idea how exactly it compares to TSMC here. So if you make the chip thinner, that could make it easier for the heat to travel basically up to like your thermal materials and everything. Again, but it will depend on how much thinner it actually is and stuff like that. And of course, the architectural side of it. Plus, further optimization has been achieved through the aforementioned modifications to the CPU core structure and implementation of an analog GNSS interface. So, yeah. Importantly, this is a 10-core chip, so this is quite beefy. It uses a Cortex X925 as its main core. That's, of course, in line with what's used on the Dimensity 9400, for example, but it will be lacking behind whatever chips will be utilizing, like, for example, the Dimensity 9500, which will be likely using the X930 prime core. It also has 7+2 efficiency cores, which I think honestly is too much, but that's probably designed to still give you multi-core performance that's kind of high-end, even though a lot of the chip isn't. This means heavier apps are not a challenge, as big core performance has improved by 15% over the predecessor. This is notable because this is a smaller promise than what is usually done between the X4 and the X925. It's more like 20 to 25%. So Samsung is erring on the lower side, and I will later bring up why that's probably the case. Blah blah blah, multi-core and stuff like that. Then they promise console level graphics. So this actually features the Eclipse or Xclipse. I hate the name. It's just such a pain to pronounce. 950 GPU. It's a 4th generation Xclipse, and it's built on top of RDNA 3. This is actually bad because while I am a fan of AMD's GPUs when it comes to stuff like consoles, because they're pretty price efficient and stuff like that, they're pretty efficient overall. But when it comes to the latest capabilities, for example, like ray tracing, yes, it supports hardware accelerated ray tracing, but you've ever compared like the latest, like the HX370, for example, against an M4 Pro chip or something like that, you will know that their ray tracing capabilities are not great. Like, in fact, it's pretty much only RDNA 4 with some of that tag being built into the PS5 Pro and, of course, their latest desktop GPUs that finally gets ray tracing sort of right on the AMD side. So, and in fact, even RDNA 3 is already kind of being replaced by RDNA 3.5. So this honestly suggests to me that this is a chip design that is pretty old at this point, at least by the standards of flagship smartphone chips. So I'm actually not super excited about the GPU. Again, maybe AMD and Samsung have come together to actually optimize it really nicely. But then again, the other question is, what will third-party applications be doing, right? I mean, sure, they can target it via Vulkan and everything, but do you really think that they will go out of their way to support like an RDNA 3 offshoot on smartphones when you already have like Immortalis GPUs, Apple's GPUs, and everything else like that, and Adreno GPUs? So I'm just a little bit confused why they didn't buy something off the shelf. Maybe it works better with their in-house NPU. But yeah, the GPU is actually the thing I'm kind of least excited here about. Maybe it still gets better, but I couldn't tell you. It also has premium 5G capabilities, 9.6 Gbps FR1, 12.1 FR2, Bluetooth 5.4, Wi-Fi 7, so that's about what we should expect for the Galaxy Z Flip 7, for example. It is powered by LPDDR5X. No details on the exact memory speeds. And yeah, when you look at the CPU here, Cortex X5, which is funny because that's not the final name. That's the name that has been rumored for the X925 because the previous generation was called the X4. But funny enough, this is a 3.3 gigahertz chip. I actually have to open another tab. Dimensity 9400 clock speed, I believe, is at 3.6 gigahertz, right? Yeah, 3.62. And the 9400 Plus actually goes up to 3.73. So despite supposedly using a forward-looking GAFET node, Samsung is only clocking their X925 core at up to 3.3, which should result in roughly a 9-10% performance reduction over what we see in the Dimensity 9400. Then we have actually a plethora of A725 cores. So that's an improvement over the Dimensity 9400 because that uses A720 cores. But yeah, we have some clocked at 2.7 gigahertz and some clocked at 2.3 gigahertz. And then we have garbage, useless, but hey, very small and efficient Cortex A520 cores. Now, should be noted, do I have the benchmark? Oh yeah, it's actually right here. I have to reduce the brightness though. We do actually have a benchmark leak. Now this is coming from June 19, so that's pretty recent, and we are not too far off from the reveal of the Galaxy Z Flip 7, for example. But these results, honestly, the multi-core result, I have said time and time again, everything over 6,000 is fine for a smartphone. It just has to be maintained well, right? And it has to be distributed well, especially in like a multi-core usage scenario, right? So part of that performance coming from the A520s, makes them basically a little bit worthless. But for example, the A725 is much more performance than the A720 cores. So that's why actually I am not too disappointed by the multi-core performance. Of course, however, when you look at the single core performance, now we're looking at, for example, the and that's why I have Geekbench open here. Now, the iPhone A18 Pro here in Geekbench gives you roughly 3,400. Should be noted, most tests will have it around 3,500 to 3,600. So Geekbench usually errs a little bit on the lower side. We also see that actually with the Android results. So a lot of tests will show the Snapdragon 8 Elite, especially the one for Galaxy, at around 3,000 to 3,100 points. And here's Geekbench basically erring a little bit on the lower side with 2,900. For the Dimensity, it's roughly correct. It's 2,650 versus what I roughly see on GSM Arena being like 2,700, maybe 2,800. So it's not too far off. But yeah, you basically see that if this is 3.6 gigahertz, right? Now it makes sense that this is the same core, but at 3.3 gigahertz. It's not quite linearly scaling here, but yeah, some of that could also be down to the exact implementation of the core design, bandwidth differences, cache differences, and stuff like that. Of course, if we also look at the multi-core results now, you see that the Snapdragon 8 Elite does regularly get over 9,000. The MediaTek 9400, I've seen it perform notably better than that, somewhere around 8,500, similar to where actually the iPhone A18 chip also performs. Yeah, that's where it should be. And yeah, I've been asked in the beginning of the stream whether or not I think that the A19 Pro will catch up to the M1. Well, you kind of see that that's already what has happened with the A18 Pro. It's really just a question of, can it sustain that performance similar to how like a MacBook Pro with an active fan can sustain that M1 performance, right? And then of course versus M2, even though it's not a huge gain, but now you have to consider, oh, and it can actually sustain that while the iPhone is lower and cannot really fully sustain that. So this is not a flagship chip for the second half of 2025. It just simply isn't, but it's also not a bad chip, and it will have to be seen with efficiency testing and stuff like that, whether the 3nm GAAFET node actually maybe it doesn't clock too high, but maybe it actually performs pretty well in terms of efficiency. Of course, no GPU promises, and the NPU promises also, of course, remain to be seen. We also see that the Z Flip 7 maxes out to 12 gigabytes of memory, which does, of course, line up with the rest of Samsung's foldables and premium devices right now. Now, before we get to even more chip stuff, because today is a crazy stream, we actually have more Samsung hardware rumors here. It's also a very recent article. It's just from June 6th. It's just I don't go too often to Samsung Mobile, and my Twitter account is kind of mostly inactive. Benveni joining the chat saying, I thought you were stuck at your job and wouldn't make a live stream today. Yeah, I actually deleted that chat from Discord because I kind of freed myself up some work. Gonna later do some like computer stuff at home, some scientific summary, dermatology, no details because I guess that's classified. But yeah, I basically got out like an hour earlier than I thought, and if I had actually worked until like 5:30 p.m., right? Or like close to 6 p.m., I would have been too tired afterwards. So yeah, but because I finished up roughly between 4:30 and 5 p.m., I ran home, quickly changed into a new shirt, and that's why I'm here. Hey, if you like this, you guys know what to do. We've been streaming for about an hour. Like the chat, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. Leave a super chat, leave a super sticker, support this channel directly. Of course, you can also become a channel member here on YouTube. You can become a supporter over on Patreon. I know my streaming schedule isn't too regular. I probably should have scheduled this for 6 p.m. as I usually do because we now have more people coming in. But I also want to be done by like, I don't know, 7:30, so I can actually eat and drink a little bit today, but that's a slightly different discussion. Riley, we still need that free healthcare stream. There will be nothing free about that stream, brother. Nothing goes without a super chat there in that stream, believe me. But some bad news that coming from somebody who, similar to how we cover like Digital Chat Station and what is that other digital and the other Weibo leakers, Ice Universe is a pretty reliable Samsung leaker, but has had his share of wrongs in the past. Now, we actually have been expecting that the Galaxy S26 series might transition from a 1 by 1.33 inch sensor to a roughly full 1-inch sensor. There have actually been rumors that it would be like 1 by 0.96 or something like that, right? So it would basically be in line, maybe even slightly better than a lot of the Chinese competition. But if you've noticed a trend with devices like the Galaxy S25 Edge being on the market right now, Samsung is trying for a different aesthetic, and I'll actually have to open a new tab. Z Fold. I think it's the 7th, right? It's in line with the with the flip. Change to English. Is that okay? Yeah. So basically, it's becoming like one. What is going on here? My RAM is definitely not full. This is just like. Okay, so that worked. So you basically see Samsung is currently focusing on making their devices a lot fucking thinner. So that's the current generation of Z Folds. Now, it should be noted that the Korean special version was already thinner, and a lot of people expected the Fold 7 to come roughly in line with that because it is also inheriting like its larger screens. But seemingly the Fold 7 is going to become in one fell swoop from one of the thicker foldables out there to being pretty much instantly the thinnest, right? So I believe when folded up, it's roughly 9 millimeters. And it's getting larger screens, like an 8.2-inch main screen, up from 7.6. So a lot of changes happening. But for example, one thing you are not getting here is a larger battery. So we're still stuck with 4,400 milliampere hours, which is already less than, for example, what Apple uses for the iPhone 16 Pro Max, which is, of course, a traditional slap smartphone. This now has an 8.2-inch screen, And Samsung's Fold screens are actually a little bit brighter than their Galaxy S Ultra screens. So the Fold 6, I believe, gets up to like 1700 nits or something like that, while the Ultra caps out around 1400. If you think about that scaling up, maybe reaching 2000 nits, but now on an even larger screen, that's kind of fucked with 4400 milliampere hours. And yeah, we have a over 25% reduction in thickness right here, from 12.1 millimeters down to 9. We also see, now granted this is a dummy, but I also think it's a more flat way for those two sides to fold up, right? While here there's still a tiny bit of a diagonal nature to that line. Here it's pretty much just flat. Yeah, but if you thought that it was bad for Samsung to keep the same battery capacity, well, basically wait for me to tell you that supposedly we are not getting any major camera changes until the Galaxy S28. So basically next year, S26 and S20 and 2027's S27 will have largely the same camera hardware. Now again, there's still always room for some changes. Slightly larger sensors, slightly improved optics, but nothing that would like break the core aesthetic, and nothing that would basically take up a lot more space, and nothing that would break the bank, right? So if you were really looking forward to that 1-inch sensor on the Galaxy S26 Ultra, seemingly that's not really happening. It's not just the company's pursuit of thin and light phones that's holding back camera upgrades. The tipster claims that Samsung's smartphone division is cutting corners because it brings the need to bring as much profit in as possible. As Samsung's chip divisions are struggling, we of course just talked about the delays of their 3nm node. In fact, it might cost them billions and billions if they actually want to make that node work, because otherwise nobody other than Samsung would actually want to buy that. It apparently came as a shock to Samsung that Google moved away from their 4nm node, and instead of talking to Samsung about like, oh, we want now your 3nm node for our Google Pixel 10 series, right? They just went straight to TSMC, and that's why the Tensor G5 coming this year is supposedly based on TSMC N3E rather than any variant of Samsung 4nm, 3nm, or even 2nm, which is basically just their rebranded 3nm. Yeah, it's all a little bit crazy here. The tipster cautioned Galaxy fans, saying that Samsung is not planning to bring major camera hardware's upgrade even with the S27 Ultra. So basically he's primarily talking about don't expect anything really for the S26 Ultra, but probably not for the S27 Ultra as well. What that means exactly for the 28, I couldn't tell you. If Samsung maybe reuses a lot of older camera hardware, maybe that will result in like cheaper devices, or at least like no further price increases. Maybe we get more RAM, more storage, right? And speaking of RAM, there's actually another rumor, and it is kind of chip related, so I thought I would include it. But the Galaxy S26 Ultra is finally gonna embrace 16 gigabytes for the global market, right? Technically, previous generations have already had 16 gigabyte models, but they were kind of locked behind regions and behind the highest storage configurations. So supposedly, the S26 Ultra is now gonna make that available globally. I believe that still means that they will have a 12 gigabyte variant, so that's probably at least for the base 256 gigabyte storage model. But yeah, hopefully if you move up to 512, or worst case scenario, if you move up to 1 terabytes, you will be getting 16 gigabytes of memory. And to be honest, that will be kind of needed, because the iPhone will be getting 12 gigabyte this year, and you definitely can expect 12 gigabytes of RAM on iOS to perform a lot better than 12 gigabytes of RAM on Android. So 16 gigabytes is kind of going to be needed here. Yeah, that's not density, that's capacity, but okay. So yeah, finally Apple is catching up here, and Samsung is just pulling slightly ahead next year. So thank you here to Sam Mobile. It's not the greatest website, if I am to be honest. There's a lot of like articles that are just blatant Apple hating. Like if I go to Sam, yeah, it's literally the main article being pushed right now. One reason Apple Intelligence is laughable next to Galaxy AI. Whatever. I hope the main reason is that it's run via cloud, but okay. But going back to actually the chip stuff that I've promised, the prints that was promised here might be the Dimensity 9500. Man, I'm on the Linus Tech Tips train when it comes to segways right now. So supposedly the MediaTek 9500, which will of course utilize the new Prime core, which is X930. The name is not yet clear. It's not yet been confirmed by ARM officially. But supposedly that new core is focused primarily on instructions per clock. It already operates at lower frequencies than, for example, the 8 Elite or Apple's chips. So it has a decent instructions per clock to make up for that. But supposedly this year it's going a little bit crazy. And with it is coming supposedly an almost 50% improvement in single core performance. That's up to 3,900 points. Again, to bring up my Geekbench cheat sheet here, which is actually here, right? If we go to the single core of the Dimensity 9400, right? If you look at around 2,700 points, getting close to 4,000, of course, will be a roughly 50% improvement, 45 to 50%. Now, if that is actually correct, that will be insane. That being said, it's not actually a rumor that's really like hard based. Again, it's coming also from a Weibo leaker, Digital Chat Station here. That's of course in the context of the discussion of like which chip focuses more on efficiency, which chip focuses more on raw performance, which chip focuses more on instructions per clock rather than clock speed. So and yeah, the Exynos 2600, that's a little bit of a questionable chip. It's probably gonna break the boundaries of today's video because I haven't done my research too much about that. But yeah, the Dimensity 9500 is, unlike the Exynos 2500, is gonna be an actual flagship processor. So whether it actually gets to like 3,900 points in Geekbench single core, which would actually put it ahead of the A18 Pro, it's probably roughly in line with the A19 Pro. It's also supposedly getting 11,000 points in multi-core. Now, if we once again look at multi-core performance here, you'll find, of course, currently it's around 8,000. Again, probably realistically more 8,500 points. That's obviously a solid improvement. Not quite as big as the almost 50% gains for single core, but multi-core performance is much, much more limited by the overall heat dissipation capabilities. Even power draw itself, you probably never want a chip like this to ever get close to drawing 20 watts, which you probably might need to get there. But yeah, that's about what you should expect, at least judging from Digital Chat Station. Now, the other chip, also supposedly reaching 11,000 points in Geekbench, and 4,000, actually over now 4,000 points in Geekbench, is the Snapdragon 8 Elite 2, which is of course going to be the main flagship chip for Android smartphones. Now, we know that unlike the Dimensity 9500, which will use the off-the-shelf ARM X core for it. This will utilize the next generation of in-house Snapdragon CPUs. So probably more focus on high clock speeds over instructions per clock, which will make it a little bit less energy efficient, especially if they push clock speeds really, really high. If they get over 4,000, that suggests that we could see a similar but smaller overall uplift in terms of percentage as we're supposedly seeing for the Dimensity 9500. That being said, of course, it does start from a noticeably higher level, especially if you actually look at a more widespread amount of data, you'll find plenty over 3,000. But hey, that would roughly put it in line with Apple's M4 chips, and that would put it way higher than currently any flagship x86 core, either Zen 5 or Intel's Arrow Lake. So this could be the year where ARM becomes just 100% supreme over x86. The one thing that does now really make me worry again, though, is the Tensor G5, because the Tensor G5, of course, still will, while it is going to utilize like an off-the-shelf X4 core, so it's not even utilizing X925, which is the flagship introduced late last year. It's the flagship introduced in 2023. And that's going to be the chip, the core inside the device coming late 2025 and then mostly sold throughout 2026. Meanwhile, the Dimensity 9500 is utilizing the X930 core. Probably, again, the name is still not clear. That is 2 generations ahead, right? And Qualcomm, which right now has a chip very comparable and even slightly ahead in some ways versus the X925, will also have a new generation ahead. So that will also be at least 2 generations ahead. And that even assumes that Google actually gives us the full performance that an X4 core has to offer. Because on Samsung's 4nm nodes, their engineering teams still couldn't even deliver what Samsung was delivering with like the Exynos 2400. So I'm really worried, like, Tensor G4. Wait, what? Is it just the G4? No, Jesus. Do I have to type in the device? Pixel 9 Pro. Yeah. Again, under 2,000. So while devices are getting close to 4,000, already, if we are looking at, for example, the iPhone, right, which does perform at up to 3,600, this is just embarrassing. And of course, even Samsung's kind of disappointing chip for this year that was supposed to launch in the beginning of the year gets you 8,000 multi-core points. Google currently doesn't even give you 5,000. Now, I assume the jump from Samsung 4nm to TSMC 3nm is probably going to give them roughly 2,300 points here, maybe 6,000 points in multi-core. But like, just knowing Google, I'm just not very enthused. So again, here we are going to be seeing an interesting competition establish itself, right? Because I will be very interested to see how much power is being drained for that supposedly similar result of 11,000 points. And judging from our first article, right, that says that Apple could reach that, but supposedly isn't, now I wonder if Apple performs, let's say, at 10,000 points, let's say it's 9 to 10% less, how much energy is saved by that? Is it 10%? Is it linearly? Is it 15%? Is it 25? Is it 20%? Because we're so far away from like the the good portion of the efficiency curve for the Snapdragon 8 Elite and potentially the Dimensity 9500. So that will be a very interesting discussion. Of course, also with Apple finally adopting a vapor chamber design, right? Apple will also be a lot more competitive when it comes to cooling capabilities, except for, again, actively cooled gaming phones. So this is going to be an interesting competition this year before we inevitably move to 2 nanometer, and then it probably depends a lot on like what the engineers are capable of, right? Are they very good at embracing GAAFET right away, right? How do their architectures scale from FinFET to GAAFET, from 3 nanometer to 2 nanometer? How might they utilize new packaging technologies like WMCM that we have talked about? Will they be working on other revolutionary technologies that are separate from the actual like transistors, stuff like new ways to utilize memory and make it faster? Right, so all these stories are combining. That's why I have this super long tab bar for you guys. And last but not fully least, though I do not really care too much about Antutu as a benchmark, but supposedly we got a leak for the Snapdragon 8 Elite performance, giving us up to 3.8 million points, which they say that the 8 Elite performs at roughly 3 million, 2.7 million. It should be noted that early benchmarks that are shared officially by Qualcomm are 10-15% higher. So we actually saw the 8 Elite perform at around 3 million in those kinds of early benchmarks before eventually most regular devices got it to somewhere between 2.5 on the lower end to all the way up to 2.8, some even to 2.9 or something like that. So you could probably expect this to be realistically more of like a 3.5, which would still be really impressive. Now, given how Antutu works, some of that is also gonna come from like improvements to memory technologies. Maybe this one is like a comparison between like 8500 memory versus 10700 memory. But yeah, Antutu isn't everything because obviously real world gaming tests show you that it's absolutely not the superior result versus other benchmarks. iPhones Antutu isn't even meant to be comparable between completely different operating systems and different graphics APIs and stuff like that. But anybody who still tries to compare iPhones and Androids based on Antutu, for one, you will be disappointed because that's not what the benchmark is made for, but you will also see that real-world games just don't show any of the scaling. Like iPhones have like 1 million less points in Antutu than Snapdragon, and that's definitely not the distance you see between like the A18 Pro and the 8 Elite in real-world gaming. Riley, what are they putting into their chips? A lot of steroids just for that specific benchmark. I also assume that the cooling system in those like reference devices is like entirely overbuilt, and there's just like less focus on everything else. You might just even have like a super bloat-free Android on it, just one benchmark, nothing else. Not designed to even like be constantly gathering like mobile data and something like that. Yeah. Yeah, but that's kind of everything. Let me quickly see if maybe we actually have the second beta of iOS 26. That's, I think, just the rumors that we have already talked about. There's a lot of small stuff that honestly I kind of do want to integrate that once there's actually the new beta. But yeah, you also see a lot of people just like accumulating a lot of experience from iOS, watchOS, macOS, right? And a lot of stuff that we didn't fully know about, even from Apple's initial reporting from WWDC and something like that. We are now getting a full understanding, like what devices support like windowed apps on iPadOS now and stuff like that, right? Riley, then they put it in a Xiaomi and it scores 40% stability. It actually, I don't think that stability is even that issue on Qualcomm, right? They by default like make it run like 10% lower, and then they have about the same percentage of stability, but because they start from a lower peak, that stability is still a lower result, yeah. But like when we look, for example, at the Xiaomi 15 Ultra, I guess, that one has what? The 8 Elite. So, and I think that the Ultras are actually not really known to be improving cooling too much, because a lot of the additional space is being taken up by the cameras. Software and performance, always don't understand why they put both of them together. So we have 9500 in multi-core. Again, this is lower than an actively cooled gaming phone or the Snapdragon 8 Elite for Galaxy, but still roughly in line. Single core performance, again, as I told you, they do perform higher than like the benchmark that's saved on Geekbench. So 3000 to 3100. That's pretty much in line. And 2.2, again, we have a wild spread of results. And never forget that these devices still lose performance from that level. Yeah, then we have still a decent downlift versus like the premium device, the truly premium devices when it comes to cooling, but nothing crazy. But yeah, then you get it's a bit more of a rocky side than the sustained load benchmarks. The 15 Ultra wouldn't complete a 3D Mark Wi-Fi extreme stress test, not in performance mode and not in the regular balance mode. It called it quits at the 19th or 20th 1 minute run of the 20-minute benchmark. So this is either some issue or with the actual compatibility. Again, I do struggle with why they are still insisting on testing Wildlife Extreme. The only answer I can think of is that they just want like comparisons with older and older devices. But it's just becoming useless, right? Also, 3D Mark, just like Wildlife scales pretty much well with like extra bandwidth, whether that extra bandwidth comes from more cache or especially more memory or faster memory. But like, yeah, it's really not a great test to test any of the new architectural features, mesh shading, ray tracing, any of that, right? But then in the CPU testing, we got 60%, which is not terrible by all standards, but also not great either. If we look at the S25 Ultra and how that performs, which again is not the greatest when it comes to sustained performance either. But yeah, you get big multi-core results close to 10,000, which actually in that regard, if we only get up to 11,000, that to me suggests we're actually highly limited by power draw and heat generation. Anywhere between 3,000 and 3,100 in single core results. This is where actually also Samsung completely shits the bed with Antutu, and one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of Antutu. But like, yeah, you have like this way lower results, almost like it's a completely generationally different chip. And in fact, it's actually closer to the OnePlus 13R's Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 than it is to the Vivo X200 Pro's Dimensity 9400 or the OnePlus 13's Snapdragon 8 Elite. So yeah, we talked about like the 8 Elite 2 reaching like 3.8 in Antutu. Well, I doubt that whatever Samsung is going to be putting out is going to be delivering that result. We have very high Wildlife Extreme tests, at least for early devices with the 8 Elite test. However, and this is where we don't have very good numbers, the sustained performance is big. So there's a 41% CPU performance loss, which leaves us with 59%. That's a weird way of putting it. But we have an all the way down to 50% GPU performance drop. And this is probably it's probably even best for the battery, right? Unless you're plugged in, which at that point your device is just going to get egregiously hot because you're also putting heat into the battery at that point. Which probably would result in a higher performance drop overall from the cooling perspective. But yeah, this system is just not designed to run at full GPU performance. And you have to understand what that means for power consumption, right? Because a 50% GPU performance drop is rarely just a 50% drop in power consumption. We could be looking at 70% or even 80% less power consumed. So the actual like cooling capability of that device might be 1/3 of what that peak is designed to do, which is absolutely crazy. Yeah, and when it came out, it had the best hardware on the mass market, but obviously we know that didn't quite last too long. We still see, of course, the 12 gigabytes being referenced, which after the article we read is supposedly finally being moved beyond with the Galaxy S26 Ultra, unlike the cameras. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. Let's see if there's anything here that we've missed. No, seemingly no beta today. I should note, if there is no beta today, but then it comes out tomorrow while I would be usually streaming, I will probably then not be streaming tomorrow, but instead on Wednesday and giving you my roughly 24 hours impressions of iOS 26 developer beta 2 and stuff like that. And beyond that, yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, I do need to eat and drink a little bit. It's been a long day for me. Still have to call family and everything else like that. So thank you to anyone who joined. I apologize for the confusion I caused on Discord. Thank you to anyone who shared all that stuff on Discord with us. So of course, some of it is coming from me, some of it is coming from you. So it really helps a lot just getting that just that accumulation of data, right? So thank you so much for that. One thing I'll do again before we leave, I'll actually share the Discord link in the live chat. I'm gonna do it right from the iPad because I should now actually have learned to do that. I still have no idea why the link expiration date is not changeable like forever on the iPad. It's still like just goes back to 7 days rather than staying infinite. Yeah, but here we are. Gonna be viewing my channel here on YouTube. Accidentally closed YouTube because I'm a complete moron. And here you go, guys. The Discord link, as per usual, to anybody who wants to join there, wants to share their findings there, wants to hear my first thoughts, because that's where I usually react first to new info. Yeah, this was a fun one. This was a spontaneous one. I again apologize for the super regular streaming schedule, but hey, you do what you can with what you're given timing-wise. So I really appreciate to anybody who still finds the time to come here. Before I leave, last shout out for you to do all the YouTube jazz, subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting, and just so I can get my usual 10 out of 10 review from Riley, I will be giving you big mark at the end of the stream. You see me in all my sweaty glory right now, of course. So leave a chat, leave a comment afterwards, not just in the live chat for that, or maybe for some of the for some of the content I was actually providing, and the commentary that is part of this live stream channel, maybe something like that. Yeah, I'll see you guys maybe tomorrow if a new beta comes out today, or on Wednesday if the beta comes out tomorrow, or if it comes out very, very late today, because then I won't have time to test it before a new stream. Thank you again for everything. You can leave a super chat if you liked what you saw and want to support me directly. You can also become a channel member. You can also become a Patreon supporter. All of that is very much appreciated. I'm spitting now at myself and my microphone, suggesting I'm now pretty tired. So it should be wrapping up. Thank you again so much. This is Mark Tech saying thank you and tuning out.